I am very glad that you have come. Today is the second part of the Back to the Canvas webinar. I will tell you a few interesting things and show you today. Well, in principle, today there will be such a pretty lamp webinar. We are not going to be engaged in various theories for a long time today, and so on. We will practice more. Well, I will try to make sure that our webinar today does not take more than 1 hour. And we will allocate 1 hour, about 1 hour, to answer your questions. But first of all, as always, a small block of news and answers to the most popular questions that were asked by support after the last webinar. So, the first thing I would like to answer, but this is me answering on my own, users have now written to the chat. Here, I remind you, our chat is moderated, that is, when you write a message, it gets into the moderation room. And then at the end of the webinar, it will be approved. So anyone who wants to ask a question, it's better to ask it now, because whoever got up first, that's the slippers. And most of the questions now before the start of the webinar, however, as at the beginning of the past, were related to the drug-addicted video sequence that turns on before the webinar. People don't understand, so I would like to give a little explanation. For the first time, I started conducting my webinars on the topic of information security in the 2015 year, that is, 10 years ago. It was the month of October, that is, well, in just a few months, it will be exactly 10 years. And then there were similar lecturers who broadcast, like priests in church. That is, there is a feeling that literally either turn it on before going to bed, or you can say amen at the end of his speech. But I didn't want to act the same way, so I always included some kind of drug-addicted video sequence that people couldn't understand what was going on at all. And, accordingly, it was much easier for them to perceive a complex topic. Agree, it's much easier to break the container in the crypt when you watched a fun carnival about life. Who doesn't know what it is? You can Google it, but how is it? To love. So the tradition has continued over the past 10 years. It used to be, of course, a little more fun, because we started somewhere in an hour, and the webinars went much longer. In other words, on average, we had a webinar about 3 hours earlier 10 years ago. 3 hours of Russian language webinar, then another 3 hours of English language. But, unfortunately, trends show that over these 10 years, users do not want to perceive information and want solutions on a platter. Well, in fact it is, and you can't blame them. Everyone saves their time, because time is money. That's why we're moving on to our news. What will we have today, and what are our main news? The first main news. The Vector T13 company, represented by me, actually began cooperation with the GeoBox company. I hope you are all familiar with this great product. In particular, we started cooperation in the field of betting in the first place. This is a solution for GeoComplay and Xpoint. What is the essence of such cooperation? The fact is that if we take work with GeoCompiles, then, as you know, the necessary Wi-Fi environments. Our Wi-Fi environments are necessary in order for the user's geoposition to be correctly determined. In my case, in my builds I did a little too, probably abstruse. I'll tell you how I did it, it's not a secret anymore. This can be told to the public. Windows has a regular API, which is called the LAN API. In other words, any software, when it wants to get information about Wi-Fi, or about devices, about networks, it turns to the regular API. In the API, accordingly, it gives information, the one that it collects from drivers and so on. I will not go into the essence here. And I did it as follows. I put a hook that intercepts responses in the LAN API. That is, in other words, we may not have a network card, there may not be a Wi-Fi card at all on the computer. But the response in the LAN API will always be the way we need it, because it depends on the geolocation that the user sets when creating a virtual machine. Well, and many, many other such interesting techniques. According to this methodology, they were directed, as I said earlier, to work with GeoComplay and with Xpoint. But now an interesting trend has emerged recently that other software is already requesting information about Wi-Fi. That is, if now it's exclusive, relatively speaking, for the X-point geocomplay, mark my words, in a year and a half or 2 years. And we will fuck ourselves with this geoposition altogether. So in order to do everything well and correctly, we decided to join forces. Geobox from the side, respectively, of its excellent product, which allows you to emulate Wi-Fi networks, and, plus, to make an internet connection through these networks as well. Well, I'm in the face of my modest product, which allows you to bypass the virtual machine detector. So this collaboration will give its successes and fruits, and will be available to every user in the very near future. The bill is already going on, not even for a week, but for a few days. I think that by the end of this week, together with Geobox, where they are on their channel, and on their channel, we will publish the features of the solution, and, in fact, anyone will be able to purchase it, and start working with the systems they need, whatever they are. This is news number 1. News number 2. You can also see it on my Telegram channel. I have made a canvas and web substitution system in the anti-detect in all personal versions. Here I would like to give a small remark. If you're not interested, you'll have to listen anyway, sorry. The fact is that in the anti-detect, there was a system of substitution of Conos and the web, and it existed, if I'm not mistaken, from 2000 of the 18th year to 2000 of the 20th, or even at the end of 2000 of the 19th. Then we cut it out. Why was it cut out? Because there was absolutely no point in it. Anti-fraud systems have stopped, so, let's say, zealously trusting Canvas and Web Jail, and began to use them more as traps. What we're going to talk about today, by the way, and what I'm going to show you today. Therefore, we could actually work on software accelerations, that is, on a standard Swift shader, on which 34% of users worked, according to data for 2022 year. But, unfortunately, Google, which is the ancestor of anti-fraud, is not because they are so smart, but because their browser is the most popular browser in the world. And plus, Edge, Opera, and many other browsers work on their platform. So, we depend on Google. And Google has decided that they don't want to use the Swift shader anymore and want to switch completely to hardware acceleration. And then, when we had 34% of all users in the world who worked on software acceleration, because, first of all, it is convenient, secondly, compatible, thirdly, it does not waste battery life on your laptops. And in general, everything is cool if you work with just your resource. But Google decided differently, and therefore this number of 34% of all users around the world has now fallen to, if I'm not mistaken, 4% only. So it continues to fall. So it was decided to use hardware acceleration, but as such by a happy coincidence, as soon as a new kind of canvas appeared, which we will talk about today during the webinar. He appeared again because of Google. We decided to turn on the system of substitution of Canosa and WebJ. At the moment, you can find a little help on how this system works, in fact, in my anti-detect channel. Incredibly simple, nothing abstruse. Just choose a video card, and, if you want, choose the source firm where these prints should come from. We have several sources. The first source is the original drivers and settings. The second source is the old drivers and settings. The third source is deep driver customization, and the fourth source is artifacts. In each of these sources, depending on the video card, a certain number of prints will be stored. And immediately answering your question, yes, they will be shared between all users. Yes, indeed, it will be. Here, because, well, if we're talking about real prints, I can't invent any prints if they don't exist, because otherwise it wouldn't be quite correct and not quite good. This system will be available starting tomorrow. Here. Well, as a matter of fact, everyone who has made pre-orders for a personal assembly will be able to receive it literally within the next week. From this topic, we move on to a new topic that excites our minds, and you ask questions with support. When will the implementation of the anti-detect on Android be? As you know, I already said at the last webinar, VirtualBox Vi fully emulated support for ARM processors. That is, now we have no problems with Android. It is with the right Android. I'm not talking about this idiocy that people do when they install Genymotion, Blusta, Android Studio, and so on. This is fucking, and it's not worth paying attention to. This is the ravings of a madman. In this case, it is possible to fully emulate Android devices. Because, for example, the same identifiers, such as emulate, for example, a SIM card. Well, how much is it? 25 lines of code. She's not supposed to work for us, right? It should give IDs. Just like everything else. So this is not a big problem. I don't want to promise on terms, otherwise you like to tell me that Vector, you promised. No, I won't promise, but I plan to release it by the 1st of September. Because it's summer now, everyone is working in a relaxed mode, no one really wants to strain themselves. But the month of September will be exactly what is needed in order to publish this decision. And, as a matter of fact, one more piece of news, which, to be honest, really upset me. As you know, we have many anti-fraud systems in the world. I won't even try to list them or recalculate them, but their account is probably in the hundreds. In principle, they do not appear every day, but I would say, yes, every month I see some new player in the market. Some of them are parasites that use other anti-fraud systems to obtain data and simply, relatively speaking, resell them. But some of them are really cool solutions. But all of them, in my opinion, personally in my opinion, they are all fucked. And the pussy will come to them very soon. I'll explain why. Now I ask you to pay attention to this slide, which is on your screen. There is a relatively inconspicuous organization called AFC. By the way, I have ACE incorrectly written on the slide. More precisely, the organization is CF, I have AFC written, but to quarrel for such a jam. So, these are, relatively speaking, international anti-fraud associations. Cool, right? That is, everyone who is engaged in anti-fraud, they are all in the same association, and in principle. Any of you can buy membership, therefore just $100 a month, who is interested. In fact, Sechko, cowards and nothing more. Well, that's real. There are no interesting moments there. You know, I have already refused many times when I was invited to various conferences. Except for the one that was recently held in Dubai. I'll explain why. Because conferences of this kind are associations, they are aimed only at one. This is purely advertising, nothing else interesting. But still, why am I telling you now about this organization? Why am I showing this event? Which will be held on August 20th in Kuala Lumpur. The fact is that the company is open. AI, and you know this company perfectly well, because you most likely use the products of this company. For example, the same GPT chat. Everyone knows him. So, the company is open. AI has decided that it wants to completely change the rules of the game, and they are releasing a chat-based GPT-6. I remind you, the 5th GPT chat comes out in July, the 6th GPT chat comes out in August. And based on GPT chat number 6, which will carry some fucking incomprehensible neural function. Which, as they say, they want to completely rewrite the rules of the game in anti-fraud systems. In fact, they want to completely throw everyone out. And you know, I believe them. I believe them that they will really succeed. There is very little information. But if you want, you can register with this anti-fraud association. You can get more data there. What interesting things have I highlighted for myself, and what I want to tell you, because all our work depends on it. Agree, if they suddenly invent something interesting, then I will be out of work, because the anti-detect will be useless, right? Where should I go then? where should I go? And you will also be out of work, because your anti-detects will be useless. Accordingly, you need to be armed, fully armed more precisely. What the Open Company says. AI. The company is open. AI claims a 100%, just not even 99 and 9, but a 100% rating of the anomaly detector. To be honest, for my part, I have been in this topic for so many years, dozens of years. I can't imagine how they want to implement, but in principle, do not trust them with billions of dollars of funding. How much is the company worth now? If I'm not mistaken, something is estimated at around $40 billion. Well, as far as I know, this is collectively more than all the anti-fraud systems in the world in general. Therefore, in principle, I can trust them. Although it seems to me that, after all, it will not do without the participation of Microsoft and Apple, anyway. And Google, of course. Because, after all, relying on the same fingerprints, on what we have right now, is not very good, it is unreliable. Because, as we will find out today in the course of our further webinar, everything can be substituted, everything can be deceived. Well, what will the company do? We will see, because one of their first clients, as they say, will be Chase Bank's Bank of America, in general. The US banking system. This will be their very first client, where they will turn on their system, respectively. I guess, again, this is pure bullshit, that they will add a Stripe here as well. Why will they add a Stripe? Because Stripe, in some incomprehensible way, unlike all other web resources, is very good at following new trends in Aphrodite and anti-fraud. So, basically, let's see what happens in the month of August. I will 100% attend this conference online. Well, if, let's say, timing allows, then I can attend there. By the way, if anyone wants to fly there and watch this conference, right, let's have a beer. Well, that's probably all with the news block for today, and we can move on to our main topic today. Today, we are going to touch upon a new canvas that has appeared in all of our browsers, in all modern browsers. And we will also touch a little on the topic of WebGL and audio imprint. As I said earlier, we had an event on this Saturday, that is, less than a week ago, we had an event in which we did not, let's say, consciously participate, but nevertheless witnessed it. The Canvas detection system has been updated in all browsers on the Chromium platform. What exactly have you decided? A new system has been completely defined. The so-called canvas with a floating point. What does this mean? This means that all the technologies that were previously, that is, relatively speaking, the same site browser leaks, loved by many of you. And I, in principle, also love him because the site is really good. This web resource began to give the browser the same instructions as a year ago, and 2 years ago, and 3 years ago. But the browser began to consider them in a completely different way. And this is a sign, firstly, of the novelty of the browser, and secondly, of the correct processing of the canvas. Let's turn on the screen demonstration now and move on to practice. Those who were at the last webinar remember that sometimes our session is not very well displayed in the ClickRally. So I ask for a moment of patience so that everything works correctly for us. So, as far as I can tell, the desktop of one of the browsers is displayed normally. Yes, there is. That's it. Okay, cool. Last time I did a demo using a virtual machine. Unfortunately, The click rally does not handle the stream from the virtual machine very well for some reason. I really miss, to be honest, the times when there was a .ru webinar platform. It's a great platform, and I don't see any analogs to it. This click rally torments me, you bitch dog. Unbelievable. Well, let's not talk about it now. What is a canvas with a floating point? Let's move on to our most favorite test. Yes. Where do we have the Leaks browser? No, it's the Stacks browser. This is a different service. I'll show it to you later. Sorry. So, here it is, our Leaks browser. What was so interesting about this service? Well, of course, first of all, many of you may notice that here now the canvas has become 100%. The signature is unique and so on. But why did this happen? The fact is that the technique of determining the canvas fingerprint from the Lex browser resource, it has not changed in any way. The processing has changed directly in the Chrome browser itself. And if we make a comparison, then you and I can see additional edit fields. I'm not going to tell you all the mechanics, all this boring bullshit. I'm just going to tell you. Starting with the 137th version of the Chrome browser and all other satellite browsers, you can call them that. The canvas print has 100% uniqueness, and plus it contains not one body, but several bodies. More accessible. If we go to the web resource that I advertised to you in a webinar, not in a webinar, in a Telegram group, then we have exactly the same canvas. Here it is, one-on-one. I just took and copied the code from the site browser licks. We all have exactly the same values. You can even see the bodies of our image, they are absolutely unchanged, except for this one, by the way. This body has changed something. And fuck with it that it has changed, we don't give a fuck about it at all. Let's move on. Why is this happening? If we turn on the so-called dynamic mode on our website here, we can see that our canvas has not one body, but several bodies. Why is this happening? The fact is that our image is divided into certain, let's call them bodies after all, but 4096 in length. And as we see, we have an image, the larger it is, the more bodies there will be, and, accordingly, here is one we have. Let's say the remainder that remains of our common image. If we update the page, I have a dynamic canvas here, then I'll tell you why. Well, in principle, you understand the logic. Now let's check if this works on new browsers, or it's always been like this. To do this, I will use a service that I advised a long time ago, but I do not advise you to use it as an anti-detect, because it does not work as an anti-detect. This is purely a check of web resources, so to speak. If we take with you, we will open the 137th version of Chrome on the Windows 10 operating system. Let's wait a bit. It's about to load. By the way, it is built on the basis of virtual machines, I won't say whose. So, we go, copy the site address. Well, let's not my site after all, but the Lix browser. So it will be more clear to you. Oops, sorry, added an extra parenthesis. So, here we see what version we have, by the way, is now running. Did you pay attention? 137th, right. We update the page, our canvas does not change in any way. That is, in this case, our body has a length of 4639 as opposed to 4096. And if we now take you and go to my web resource in the same service on the old browser, let's update. Then we see that we have the segmentation of cans going a little differently here. The maximum value is 892. That is, the Google Chrome browser represented by all its satellites. They have reduced the body size of our PNG file by half and allow you to segment it with floating point. Now I'm telling all this shit on my fingers. What does this mean? This means that when you draw one canvas, you are drawing not one canvas, but several. Well, in a simple way, let's say. This is the first one. Second, what does it threaten us with? We are threatened by the fact that if you use an old browser, well, for example, change its user agent to a newer one, then anti-fraud systems can calculate you with 100% probability. What else do we have? Do we have any other interesting point? We have an interesting point that now with this, let's say with this segmentation, it will be much more difficult for us to identify the canvas print if the web resource does not openly declare it. What do I mean by that? The canvas print in this case, look at it again, it's quite large. In other words, it's a big picture, different effects, and so on. Now, when such a large image is not used, so an image of such a large format, the canvas print can be anything. In other words, it can be tables, it can be some design elements, and so on. And in fact, we will never be able to understand with you whether the canvas imprint is used on this resource or not, because we will not be able to distinguish it from the legitimate rendering of all other canvases. This is a really interesting moment, because this interesting moment, it allows virtually all extensions that are currently working on the canvas fingerprint detector. It allows them all to be forgotten in the very near future. Well, in fact, once again, that this threatens us at the moment. At the moment, Google has changed the rules of the game, and now anti-fraud systems will be much angrier towards our equipment, because they have a new opportunity to identify the user, namely the identification of users of anti-detects in the first place. The average user will not be affected in any way, but the anti-detects, and, in particular, the developers of anti-detects, who will need some time to implement improvements in their software. Of course, it will take them time. And, again, at this time, you may be out of work for the time being. So I recommend paying attention to this, at least if you want to escape from this. Do not expose the modern version of the browser. This, at least for the next, probably month or two, it may well suit you. Therefore, if you suddenly see that you have a version of the Chrome browser 137 and higher, it is absolutely impossible to use it if your software does not support competent processing of such a fingerprint plan. So since we are here in our screen demonstration, let's talk about one more interesting moment now. Canvas is good. Canvas, we have a standard API, which has been working for the 12th year. But in addition to the standard API, we have a system called back to the canvas. We need to continue a little. And as we did in the last lesson, as I told you, I'm going to exit the browser service now, so in principle, I don't need it yet. So, as I showed in the last lesson, we have a lot of techniques for how to determine the substitution of a canvas print. We have sorted them out with you. I will not repeat it. I would just like to draw your attention to a few additional methods. The fact is that if we go, for example, to the browser site, we can look here for the presence of a WebGL fingerprint. But we can't see anything else. If we switch to some other web resources, there are virtually no verification systems anywhere. And users suffer from this. Users suffer when they start using some shit resources, shit checkers, which we discussed in our last lesson. How can a user be sure that he is really doing everything right and that he does not have some kind of quack product in his hands, but really high-quality software? By the way, I would like to draw the attention of users to the Russian language chat in my Telegram, because their users have shared their information about how and what works in terms of substitution. A small remark like this. The user Nasty reported that the undetectable browser passes all the tests that we are with you today, which we are going to get acquainted with today. User Kirill. Kirill also said that some of his browsers had passed, but unfortunately he did not tell us which ones. And, as a matter of fact, another user of Neon by Above, my good friend, reported that the Dolphin browser did not pass this test. They did not pass Go Login, and the Octo browser did. Why am I saying all this? An interesting moment was this after the last webinar. The supports in the personal support and people broke through to me. Who broke through to me? Because, to be honest, I, unfortunately, haven't actually read the personal account lately. Therefore, I offer my deepest apologies to everyone who tries to reach me, but alas, it's better to do it through support. Because the person is overwhelmed, and there is a lot of work. So, after the last webinar, when I just published a page with a Canvas test, users wrote and said that they had tested themselves on a dolphin, and in general, in short, a complete mess. What is the complete mess? And then I recreated it all on my own. I'll tell you what I did. I am this testic. If you look at it now, here is the very first, yes, the original canvas. I just took it and tore out the leaks browser from the site. You can see here absolutely the same canvas, the same test, the same rendering. So, an interesting point is one that I really laughed at. You know, the Dolphin browser on the Leaks browser site replaces the canvas, but on my site it does not replace the canvas. And you know, an interesting point is that it turns out that in this browser substitution takes place only on the domains of websites. That is, he replaces Leaks with the browser, he replaces it on other checker sites, and some left-hand site that is unknown to him. He no longer replaces it, he is already everything. He says, fuck you, I don't know you. Here's an interesting moment, and hello. I do not know, of course, how it was possible to do this. In my opinion, among all the anti-it browsers, this is the most stupid bottom, because how could a developer allow this? That is, he just took and set up his site stupidly for checkers. That's it. It doesn't fucking work anymore. And, by the way, an interesting point is this. I would like to tell you who will listen to this webinar now, or then watch it if there is a recording. By the way, we don't have a record today. We don't have a record today, alas. So, those who did not get to this webinar were not very lucky in this life. What I would like to say. Here is this page that I'm showing you, you can save this page. How can you save this page? Here, right-click on the View Page Source. We took all of this, highlighted this shit, copied it, saved it as TML, and can use it locally on your computer. This will give you the opportunity to check all your prints, check their changes, well, at least everything, but Canvas and WebGL. Audio we will add more. You can check it without the internet, without being tied to anyone, and you can be 100% sure that your data will not fly anywhere, nor your IP address or anything else. So here's a little gift for you from me. You can check your anti-detects, how they work, and how they work correctly. Well, firm words to deeds. We are moving from Canvas to WebGL. In the last lesson, you haven't seen these points yet, because I added them today just before our webinar. This is method number 13, the original image is our WebGL. And if we see this, by the way, MD5 hash, right? If we wanted to sort out now what a WebGL imprint looks like in reality, but it would take us about a few characters. How much is there? Somewhere, probably, there are 150,000 characters for such an image. 150,000 characters, that would be our imprint. This is in our reality, in fact, what a WebGL imprint looks like. In our case, it is represented as a conveniently readable hash, conveniently readable by people hash MD5. Nothing remarkable, just the most common WebGL test that you can find on all other checker pages. I even have it a little simplified, because I don't even have a gradient here and so on. It would be possible to turn around and add even more different effects. But, unfortunately, this did not happen, so fuck it, so be it. The second method, just like we did with you with Canvas. This is the method when the image is drawn upside down. That is, the same triangle, the same effects, but turned 180 degrees. Allows us to achieve a completely new imprint. And then, In method number 15, thanks to the use of WebJ's graphics management instructions, we have the opportunity to flip the print obtained in method number 14 by 180 degrees again. What does this lead us to? This leads us to the fact that if some noise was superimposed on the image that is rendered using WebGL, we have a fairly high chance that we can detect these noises due to the fact that we flip the image again and translate it again into a byte array, and then into base 64. Accordingly, the simplest technique, the simplest, the oldest, I can't even say how many years this technique has been used, and how much it has been used in anti-fraud systems, but for sure it has probably been for a dozen years. One of the very first and simplest methods that allowed detecting a change in the fingerprint. By the way, for whom it will be interesting, this method may have been introduced for the first time on the Chase system. Let's move on. Our next new method. Method number 16. We don't have anything on it right now. It would seem a white field, right? But in fact, this white field is not a problem. It is a sign that everything is okay with us. I'll explain why. The white field is that we have not found any artifacts. And I'll show you how this web resource can show you where the substitution is taking place on your fingerprint. So, method number 16. It allows you to use fragment shaders to compare the fingerprint inside your video card. That's even up to the moment it actually gets into the browser. Of course, I didn't put it quite correctly, but in principle it's like that. I won't go deeper. I repeat, we are speaking bird language now, just telling you how it happens. If this method turned the image over and compared it, this method made a comparison inside our video card. In a simple way, who is it for me now? If one of the techies listens, they will peck me for this expression. But I do not know how to tell you this process in a different way so that it is accessible. Method number 17. How to pronounce occlusion correctly. Occlusion. Occlusion query for comparing images. This method allows us to draw an image repeatedly, that is, it allows us to simultaneously draw dozens of images with various distortions in one stream, that is, relatively speaking. Rotate it by half a degree, for example, and so on. And then compare the results. Of the current methods, this method is not that relatively new, it's about 5 years old we can say. But still many anti-detect browsers, they can't pass it. They cannot pass this method. And here, by the way, let's go back to the Russian language chat again. There, for example, people have found browsers that bypass them. It will be interesting to me if you write in the comments in a Telegram, or if someone records this video for YouTube, for their channel. I will be interested if you write your anti-detect browsers that pass. But it would be really interesting, because at the moment, we already have more than 200 of these browser anti-detectors. I can't count them anymore. I don't know if I stopped after 150 or 200. They appear every day, some new ones. And, as a matter of fact, method number 18. Method number 18 is interesting. Why? Because the user Mikhail B., also on the Telegram channel, on my Telegram channel in a Russian-speaking group, mentioned an article that I wrote for my web resource, and there I applied one of the tests. This test was written for the company Skia, which, in fact, oversees graphical acceleration in the Chrome browser in this case. If Chronos Group supervised it earlier, now it is Skia. And Skia has a great product called Skia Gold. I've talked about him many times. The Skia Gold product allows, based on data from Google, to make a 100% check of your canvas, whether it exists in the world or not. If anyone is interested, we drive Skia Gold into Google, we see an example of this. I have already shown it at my past webinars. In fact, I will tell you in such a way that thanks to the Google Chrome browser, which is used by more than 1 billion people around the world. As you understand, you can get a real canvas print even without the canvas page itself. And then, accordingly, all this data is collected into one single statistic, which allows Google to identify automation systems based on this technology. In particular, by the way, who would be interested if someone would be interested in such a laboratory aspect? In VirtualBox, or rather in my VirtualBox-based anti-detect, there is the possibility of tracking absolutely all canvas renderings. If it's interesting, go to the blogs of the virtual machine, and you will see there how the canvas is drawn. So that's what I want to tell you. The canvas is drawn at the moment of the browser launch itself. That is, while you haven't visited any web resources yet, you haven't seen anything but canvas technology, which is not only connected, I remind you, with the print, but is primarily connected with the rendering of the image. It is used in several dozen images that are rendered using your video card and, accordingly, can be transmitted. Where to? That's right, to Google's servers, where they are processed by the software product and the Skira company. So everyone, welcome to the new conspiracy theory. Method number 18. Method number 18 allows you to analyze the color of pixels, which allows you to detect if there are pixel changes somewhere. For example, by half a tone, relatively speaking. This method works like with a canvas print, when we saw it here. Where do we have? Yes, here is the consistency, and the sort of the date, and the noise check with a solid fill. Here, in fact, a variety of method number 7 is performed only in the context of a web gel in this case. I would also like to make one such small remark, which I am obliged to mention. The fact is that the canvas print can be drawn even without the canvas itself. In fact, canvas can be rendered as canvas API as well as WebGL API. That is, both ways, and so it can be drawn. But comparing the results is another matter. Accordingly, the simplest method is how to determine the use of any substitutions. This is when the canvas print is rendered both canvas and web at the same time. It should be method number 19 on this page, but unfortunately, because I have a fantastic download, I haven't finished it yet. I think to finish it today, before the end of the day, so who will use this web resource for their own purposes. I recommend paying attention to it. By the way, you may wonder why I didn't tie it to any domain. This web resource is temporary. I'll have it in, I don't know, maybe a week. In a couple of weeks I'll delete it. So I advise you to keep its source code. And why the domain? Because, as it was discovered, in some anti-browsers there is a substitution just by domain. But for some reason they refuse to change the IP address. Well, perhaps some features of the architecture of the actual anti-detect browsers themselves. So, we talked a little bit about this technology, but I would like to make another interesting remark. Yes, by the way, about the query is called. The web gel of the second version is used here, just in case. Yes, well, maybe someone didn't notice. I would like to make one more small remark. What kind of extra fuck is waiting for us next? The fact is that WebGL is a technology that is no longer developing absolutely. That is, it will not be. What we are now, what we are about to see with you, is the past. We are now really looking into technologies that are 10 years old. Well, Kane's even more. We are being replaced by a web gel, which you can officially already visit, who is interested in looking at the site. The so-called Kronos Group. You can see that this technology will no longer develop due to its limitations. And the biggest fucking thing that awaits us is the WebPoo technology. WebPoo technology at the moment it is actually represented only, well, let's face it, on the web resource browser leaks. Here if we go with you to more tools and, accordingly, the web. In fact, there is absolutely nothing interesting at the moment. There is also a web resource called fingerprint.com clock, which I was talking about. You don't need to use it, as the anti-fraud system itself is great, but as a checker site, you just need to be a complete fucker to use it. So, the checker site, by the way, also checks for the presence of a web poo. But we are waiting for the update of Chrome number 139, which should happen by a happy coincidence, just in the middle of August. Perhaps that's why the company is open. AI plans to implement its solution based on a web poo. Perhaps so. But the point is what? The bottom line is that there will be brand new prints. And these new fingerprints, they depend not just on the information received from our browser. They depend on the performance of the video card. And here I'm revealing a little secret to you. The fact is that your video card, it has different performance. Yes, Captain Obvious greetings. So, there is a superbly simple possibility. In what way? Well, first of all, of course we can separate the Intel video card from Radeon and NVIDIA with 100% probability. In general, this is the first one. Secondly, if we are talking about a family, then we can distinguish the family by performance. For example, the 40th from the 50th, from the 30th, from the 20th, or lower, of course. From video cards that, for example, do not support ray tracing at all. And this leads us to what? The basis of the web poo technology, which Chrome is proud of now in the face of its developers, makes it possible to play games inside the browser. Yes, in fact, that's it. And that means total control over the graphics card. And that means the rest. In order for our video card to function normally, the browser must control it with a certain freak and collect data about it. At a critical moment, he can terminate the session if the video card itself has requested it. This means that we have another great opportunity added here, stress testing. And well, the scale of the cunt, of course, they even amaze me. And I've actually been in this topic for decades. So I recommend that you do not waste time and work well during this summer, because when it all happens, and it will happen very soon, in a couple of months, but there is a possibility that we can stay, well, if not completely out of work, then for a couple of months we can definitely stay out of work. So I recommend that you pay attention to this problem. But again, if you work with the Belarusian knitwear website, you have nothing to worry about. But if you work with any really serious web resources, here you can already have some kind of problems. And some people think, I've often seen this in the comments, horror stories from Vector and so on. Well, okay. Everyone perceives information in their own way, right? Here someone heard the information, thought horror stories there, I don't give a fuck, I went to myself, I'm fine. I will continue to deliver dildos from Amazon to Refound and sell them to a local brothel. Yes, maybe it will be. Maybe a person really has a life on the ointment and everything is fine with him, he has enough for $100 a month. Well, if we are not talking about worms, but we are talking about normal work, then we can understand that even a couple of days in work can create a pretty big hole. If we are already talking about the costs of various kinds of materials, equipment, and staff. Because we understand that it's pointless to work for one person, and when you have a staff of monkeys working for you, it's a completely different money, a completely different level. But if you don't know about such innovations that will happen, then you can sit in a puddle. Let's move on to our next topic. The next topic is absolutely small, I would even say tiny, but I am obliged to disclose this topic. I am obliged to disclose the topic because, again, Many users are victims of marketing and nothing more. What is an audio fingerprint again? Surely you've all heard about him, but not everyone understands what he looks like. And not everyone understands the scale of the cunt you're being dragged into. Look. I am sending the original page to the chat now. This page was found, or rather created by students of Princeton University, when they were doing research on the Google Web resource, in the 2017 year. And at Google, he used this technology, used the technology of taking an audio fingerprint. Let's click on the Fingerprint Me button and refresh your memory a little bit. After all, that this is happening. This shit, you can ignore it. Here is the information about our sound card. Sampling rate, number of columns, and so on. Well, here you are, at least you can know that web resources see the number of columns and the sampling rate. But where is the fingerprint on this page? Maybe he's this. Maybe. Or this one. Or maybe this. But, unfortunately, many users are victims of marketing. Again, I repeat, I will explain for what reason. They're trying to change this. I'll tell you even more than that, check your anti-detects. Most likely, that you have your anti-detect knows how to change this shit. Now let's make a small test on the most common browsers. We open our Stack browser and launch. Let's number 137, and no, one moment, let's launch several at once. Let's run the number 100. It will allow us, by the way, to launch several browsers. One moment. I just want to show you, because well, this is a blatant mistake that they constantly write to my support. They attach screenshots proofs. Oh, your audio print does not change, your fucking mouth. What should we do? We open 137th Chrome, 136th Chrome, 135th Chrome. Now let's see how this fucking miracle fingerprint changes or doesn't change on real browsers. Copy the address of the page, open it in parallel. Don't pay attention, it's just that the site's certificate no longer works here. Click the Fingerprint Me button in the browser number 137, Chrome 137. We see a print that starts at 19F2 and ends at 58F. It absolutely completely coincides with my host now. Okay, 136th browser, right? Let's check on the 136th. We have it hanging. Fuck him. 135th so far. Yes, 136th we have something hung up, but no, that's all, it's saggy. Let's go to this web resource again. A glaring mistake. I can't imagine how you work with the same stripe. Damn, what kind of fingerprint do we have? 19019F2, 58F, exactly the same as it was on the browser 137. And exactly the same as it will be now on the browser 135. Now you will understand why it may be a little tedious, but now you will understand what I'm driving at. And will not make this egregious mistake, and maybe finally stop chasing my support maniacally. So, 3 browsers. We have exactly the same fingerprint. And plus, let's pay attention to something else. These prints here are the same, right? Here, let's take a look. We will return to them later, but so far we see that they are exactly the same. Probably you will say, Vector, what the fuck are you showing us? You're showing it all on virtual machines, right? It should not change in fact. Well, let's check if you will be right or not. We are going back now to the test page, or rather here we have it back, here we have it back. Let's now launch the browser version with you, for example, 130. Yes, why not? 132, 131, and 130. Wait, what am I doing? I'm an idiot. I'm launching Firefox. Sorry. I didn't mean to. So, we launch version 132, duplicate the page, wait. We launch 132. We launch, for example, 130. Let's launch 128. We don't have our certificate working yet, but it won't work because it doesn't depend on us. On the browser version 132, we look at our fingerprint. Exactly the same, nothing has changed at all. OK, 130. Look here, exactly the same print. Again, nothing has changed. Oh, and by the way, you might not be able to see well. Let me zoom in. That's how I think it will be better. Well, what version do we have? 128. Let's look at versions 128. Exactly the same fingerprint. What to do? Not a damn thing works. Let's go back and check, for example, version 120. 120. Let's step into two versions, 118 and version 116. Let's check it out now. And even on this version, which one do we have here? 120 was, right? 120 identical prints. I'll show you just in case. I'll show you because it's hard to see. Now you will understand, now we will get to the bottom of it. It's exactly the same here and 116. Checking it out. And 116 is exactly the same. Everything indicates that the vector is selling you shit and still checks through virtual machines. Right. Well, really, that's how it looks. Let's try to go a little lower still. Version 110, version 108, version 106. It takes a long time, doesn't it? It takes a lot more time. We look at the 110th version. And for the 110th print, we have not changed in any way. Another nail in the coffin of vector theory. When will this imprint change? On virtual machines, it will probably never change and will always be the same. Right? That's probably what everyone thinks. Therefore, this fingerprint needs to be changed urgently, otherwise they will not come from Amazon dildos. No, they fell to the base, fucking, it's the audio fingerprint that they check. It's the same everywhere. How can this be? Let's go even deeper now. Maybe the 100th version. Let's launch one now. The same web resource, everything is the same. We remove the fingerprint, and on the 100th version, we have exactly the same fingerprint, no different. Vector has been shitting himself thinly. And maybe version 94 will help us. And with this version, we did not succeed, yes, to change it. Version 94, as an option. We are waiting. And on the 94th version, it does not differ from us in any way. That is, we have stepped down 40 versions, and in our browser, it does not differ in any way. 88th version. How old is she now? 2.5 years, if I'm not mistaken, or more. checking out. And here it is exactly the same. When will this shit end? 83rd or maybe 85th I'll take. One little secret is kept here. We look. The same one-on-one print. But here, you know, I'm even starting to get a little indignant. 19 at 2, still the same. We're going back. 84th version. We are already close to the goal, so don't worry. Waiting. And finally, we have changed this imprint. Really? On the 84th version. Starting from the 84th version to the 137th. The audio fingerprint, obtained with the help of the so-called dynamic compressor, is the same in all Chrome browsers. You can check it yourself. Let's check out another small test. We have an Edge browser. Let's run the 85th, 84th version in it. In the same way, we launch the 85th, launch the 84th. We look at the results. If I'm right, on the 85th version, we should have a print of 19.2f, or whatever it was called, right? And here we are 19f2. And now we see the same imprint on the 85th version of the Edge. And the 84th version is right next to us. If my theory is right, then we will now get exactly the same fingerprint that we see on the 84th version of Chrome. And as we can see, it is exactly the same here. And now I'm going to tell you one very important point that you will need to work with, let's say. The fact is that this print, it has a very mediocre relationship to audio. The fact is that it does not depend on the settings of your video card, it does not depend on how many speakers you connect, what sampling rate you set. It depends and always depends in 100% of cases only on the version of the audio engine of your browser. This is the imprint of the audio movement. Therefore, if you suddenly see that your browser changes this fingerprint, you can, as I said in one of my webinars, draw the word Dolbob on your forehead. That's about how anti-fraud systems will see you. And then don't complain that even your anti-detector browser, which should work on the Belarusian knitwear website, doesn't really work. Why do users change this fingerprint? The fact is that it's not always the manufacturers of anti-detects. They don't always want to give you a good product. They always want to take your money. And therefore, the more prints they will change, especially if they have screwed on some of their shit checker, the more prints they will change. The more people will come to them. Agree, it's much better to use an antidote browser that changes all the fingerprints than to use an expensive vector shit. Because it doesn't change the audio fingerprint. Her fucking aunt, how can this be? Why the fuck doesn't the audio fingerprint change in the vector? Because this imprint, bitch, does not actually exist in our world with you. Audio fingerprint, there are two types of it, here they are both. This is what is called a real audio fingerprint. They both have a dependency on the sampling rate of your playback device. In other words, when you change the sampling rate, what is the sampling rate just in case? Click the right mouse button in the tray on the column icon, go to the column Properties, and there select the frequency 44,100 Hz, 48,000 Hz, and so on. So, these two prints depend primarily on this sampling frequency. But among other things, I would like to tell you about this print here, a separate one. An imprint obtained using an oscillator node. It depends on your browser, but your browser is instructed how to process this fingerprint by none other than your processor. That is, relatively speaking, if you want to see what a processor fingerprint looks like, you see it now. This is the fingerprint of your processor. And depending on what instructions your processor supports, the audio in the browser itself will be processed differently. But, as we can understand with you and guess a little, we actually have processors with the same instructions. There are not just a lot of them, they are up to the dick. That is, if we take, for example, Intel, well, correct me, who will watch this video or now. Correct me, if the 7th, for example, the 7th generation of Intel, and which one now? The 13th already, right? I'm sorry, I don't use Intel, but in short there, for example, Intel AI7, there are 700, and Intel AI9 13300. They actually have the same instructions in the browser, in the processor. And accordingly we come to what? We come to the conclusion that the difference between an Intel processor, for example, i7 7700, and Intel i9 13600, there will be no difference at all. And the only difference that can be is the difference in sampling rate, which will impose its own specific pattern. And in this case, we come to what interesting conclusion? The conclusion is more precise. The fact is that there are only a couple of dozen audio prints in fact. Yes, with the help of an audio fingerprint, do you know what can be calculated? With a 99% probability, it is possible to calculate the server. Because the server has special instructions in the processor that home computers do not have. Therefore, it is simply possible to calculate the use of, for example, a remote server or server equipment, thanks to the audio fingerprint. But to calculate in terms of separating one user from another, alas, entropy is not enough. And, in particular, you may ask, then why the hell did Google use this fingerprint on its web resources? And I will answer you. Those resources that were tested by students from Princeton University, as this inscription at the very top tells us. These were shared resources, that is, the mail registration page, for example, and so on, which has nothing to do with the anti-fraud. And has to do with only one thing, the anti-bot. Google made this system in order to determine the use of automatic registration systems and automation systems, depending on the processor instructions. That's it. That's the whole fucking mystery of the audio print, which has been covered with 7 seals for the past 8 years. But due to the fact that there was no clear and competent information, users were inspired by users that they needed to change this fingerprint. Well, what you do with this information next is up to you. I'll tell you this, that changing the audio fingerprint, except for changing the sampling rate, which in fact does not affect absolutely nothing, is absolutely pointless. If someone has other information, well, I will be glad if you share this information with the public or enter into a polemic with me. Because it would be very cool, because the truth is born in disputes. Well, let's move on to our final topic now. And after that, we take a short break for 5 minutes and move on to answering questions. What is the final theme? I'm going to tell it to you now, or rather I'll draw it better. Closing our browsers. By the way, if someone wants to check, you can use the same browser service to check how these fingerprints are formed and so on. I mean, well, it's not a problem. So, my dear ones, look, we have us. Here we are. I hope you can see it clearly, so we will increase it a little. And there is our target resource. This resource is very large. Well, that's how we'll do it. Some time ago, we witnessed a fantastic phenomenon, namely, here is such a website. Now I will show it to you. You know it, yes, it probably won't load right now, because I'm sitting without a VPN. Using VPN and various kinds of software methods to circumvent censorship systems in the United Arab Emirates is illegal and can be prosecuted. Plus, a rather large fine will be imposed. Therefore, I do not use this in any way and do not use any other means. But you can? So I'm going to tell you. On this web resource, there wasn't. Some time ago, one interesting feature was noticed. This web resource has started to break through all absolutely proxies. Here are all the IP proxies that we used with the help of the same proxy and so on. He started punching them. For what reason? Draw. The first protocol that we use, the most standard one, is the TCP protocol. Here it is our TCP protocol. Let's make it more powerful. By default, the proxies that we can buy on the market now, for the most part, still use the TCP protocol. Unfortunately, I, of course, tried to change this situation, and for several years now, we have been offering excellent proxies on the Detect website. Expert. A really real device, and in the near future, as I have promised many times, and yet we are already getting to this. Users will have the opportunity to rent entire subnets, and we will have the opportunity to rent routers. But most likely we wanted to do this earlier, but unfortunately, we need to do so-called foolproof protection. In order not to give the user too many opportunities, otherwise these same routers will simply be taken away from us. And in fact, we have already seen this on the CA tests. Therefore, we will start the service with the launch of real routers that are located in the USA, from the USA. This service will be available, I think, again by the month of September. We'll try to make it. If not, then I think we will launch in October, because it is in our interests to launch as soon as possible. So, we go from this, we return. Most proxies use TCP protocol. What other protocol do we have? We have a protocol called UD. Surely you've heard of him. The UD protocol is not supported in all proxies. Why is it not supported? Because in some cases, those who made proxies are crustaceans, and they don't quite have enough brains to turn on support in their bad bind. Or we're not squid. This is the first one. Secondly, UD support is used in the most magnificent way for dodos like this. And the big proxy services don't want their proxies to be used for dodos like that, so they disable them. Although this information is already bearded and gray, but nevertheless, here are some people living in the past. But in addition to TCP UD protocols for working with web resources, we also have one protocol, which you know. Because I have already talked about it many times. This is the Quick protocol. If you are interested, you can watch my webinars on the Quick protocol, how it works, how the Quick protocol is decrypted, and how a web resource that uses the Quick protocol can get information about your host computer. Well, that is about the computer from which, strictly speaking, the connection comes using the Quick protocol. By the way, if you go to YouTube and type in a Quick decrypt there, just don't make a mistake in the syntax. Then you can find a pretty interesting webinar dated 2020th year, where people show how to decipher the Quick protocol, and what great features it carries. Then it was version 36th, now we have, if I'm not mistaken, the 72nd version of the Quick protocol. So, the web resource her.no, which we do not load now for obvious reasons. He just used the Quick protocol in order to determine the real IP address of the user. Since the user used proxying only on the TCP protocol, and Quick bypassed this protocol. That is, Quick didn't care. But Quick is still a rather bearded protocol. It was invented back in 2012, that is, it is already 13 years old. Now it is used on a lot of web resources. These are the fundamental protocols of HT3 and so on. But in addition to this, we have another protocol, about which you have not heard, and very much in vain. Because this protocol will now start fucking everyone very, very, very hard. This protocol is called Web Transport. No need to think that it's fucking new. This protocol was simply nowhere to be found. It was developed quite a long time ago, but it began to be implemented in the browser only this year in fact. And your 137th versions of Chromium, 136th, even 135th versions of Chromium perfectly support this protocol. And that means what? And this means that your proxies that use the TCP protocol, UD protocols, are even subject to the Quick protocol. Because Quick still uses UD as a basis, they will absolutely not care whether you have a web transport or not. And a web resource, any web resource that uses the web transport protocol, it can calculate your real IP address. Bypassing all your proxification systems, including bypassing the OpenVPN in Urgard or such softens as Nicara, Tuntusec, Proxyfier and everything else. Support for the Web Transport Protocol, I repeat, began with version 135 of Chromium, that is, it is available in all of our current browsers. There was such a web resource, now I'll show it to you, Hell 13 Online. Hell 13 Online, I do not know what is going on here with him. He's got some kind of game going on here. And he just had a web transport, but now this web transport is not available, or at least I have it. I would also like to make a remark. Your provider does not always allow you to use the web transport protocol. You also need to pay attention to this. But if your provider allows you to use web transport, then your business is not very good. Because, despite the fact that according to all checkers, according to all tests, you will always have a great IP address, it will not differ anywhere, then according to the protocol. The web transport of the checker 4, which I have not actually found it in the public at the moment. Write, by the way, in the comments, if it's interesting, I'll torture you. In principle, it is not very difficult to do it there. Here, well, or just maybe, if it's interesting, I'll write it down separately for the next lesson. I will create a test page and tell you how to de-anonymize using the Web Transport Protocol. So, thanks to the Web Transport Protocol, it will be possible to bypass all your proxies and all your proxifiers, saxifiers, and all other ficators. So I draw your attention, I want to put it into your heads that there is a certain difficulty that you may have already encountered. And I advise you to study this topic a little more because, as I have said in all my webinars, the most important anti-detect is in your head. Well, now we're going to take a break, and take a short break, literally for 5 minutes, and return to answering questions. Or, perhaps, consider 1 or 2 more topics. By the way, a very important point, about which, perhaps I was reminded in the chat, perhaps not yet. I promised one script, as it is possible to bypass detect with the help of the temper monkey plugin. Tell me detect web. JL. I'll tell you now. For some reason, I have a link duplicated here, literally for 1 moment. Let me just drop it into the chat now, just in case. Look here, here's a link. This is our script for calling a web gel, that is, as we remember, just like we did with Canvas. We run a script for calling a web gel in the browser console, get our web gel, and then copy it into the substitution script. But this is for those who are interested in passing these tests, and, accordingly, getting around it on their real hardware, on their real browser, and not bothering with using anti-detection browsers, such as a small alternative. But I hope the links are probably in the chats. There are enough links in the chat for you. And now we'll turn on the music, take a break, smoke, make tea, or open a can of beer, and come back in 5 minutes. Thank you for your attention. For now, a short break. Let's check the sound. The sound is there, everything is cool. So, I hope you've had a little rest from boring lectures, and we can move on to answering questions. So, I remind you that you asked questions in the chat, you don't see them now. I will approve the questions accordingly, since I am here alone without moderators, and without anyone. By the way, today's online something does not please me very much. Last time, we almost reached 500 people, today we are not reaching 300. Isn't the topic interesting? But next time, we will then talk about how to register OnlyFans using neural networks. So, let's move on. The first question with pictograms from the user is me, Dimajan. It is I, Dimajan, in the person of David, who greet you. Hello, hello. Sorry I don't read the PM. I remember what I have to read. You write me some important, very long messages all the time. I haven't been having a good time with my free time lately. Although I admit honestly, today, right now during the break, I still went and drank a Miscal because, well, I'm already overloaded. And I need to find myself a little rest. And a webinar is always exhausting because it's quite problematic to broadcast with a voice for 2 hours. As I used to broadcast for 6 hours in a row, I'm just in shock. Not to mention the fact that I remember the times when 2015 year, 10 to 12 lessons a day for 1 hour. That is, to work, in principle, 14 to 15 hours, and all the time with the language. How did the head stand up? How did I stand it? I fucking know him. Question from user Dennis. When is the Patreon update? Dennis, I will tell you about the Patreon, and everyone who is interested in it. Patreon has one special feature now. He has a black screen sometimes. I'll tell you what the reason is. This is not a Patreon's problem. I'll explain the reason. The fact is that earlier, if we take the anti-detect of the 4th version, we used fake values of video cards there. That is, if we look in the device manager, it doesn't matter in anti for even in personal versions or in Patreon. The device IDs that were there, they don't exist in nature, never existed. In the new 5th version, since we use hardware acceleration, we have real ones everywhere. And sometimes we face such a problem. Fucking Windows is trying to roll its drivers. And for what reason he does it, I can't honestly say. No one knows, because this is the internal logic of Windows. But it turns out what kind of situation. He either rolls the drivers from his internal storage, or after a while, he downloads them through Windows Update. And when he puts them on, there is a black screen. In the new Patreon update, I solved this problem, and Windows will no longer perform this manipulation. I won't promise on terms, but it will be for sure, 100% Saturday of this week. He didn't seem to promise, and he seemed to promise. On Saturday, we can hope for a new Patreon. Well, in addition to this, there are a few more fixes, so it's Saturday of the current week, that is, the day after tomorrow. Let's move on. The next question is a survey from the user assist. But no, wait, stop. Which question have I approved? The moment. David writes that these are not drug-addicted songs, but rather positive ones. Yes, but actually yes, because I have said many times before, when we had LAMP streams, that I am very annoyed with the system of information submission in higher education institutions. And despite the fact that I have already received 2 higher educations and a PhD at Leiden University in The Hague, I absolutely do not like the system itself, because you are not interested. You have to be either motivated, or you have to be a complete nerd like me to waste your life on this shit. But I don't know any other way. Question from the user: did it happen? It worked. Vector, hi. Hi there. What do you think about the Datadom anti-fraud system? I only think of it as a good, great system, but I don't see anything so supernatural about it. It's just cool because it's used on a lot of web resources. They have a good base. That's all I can say about her so far. So, one more moment now, I'll check just in case. Sound. Sec. Proxikov. Will all proxies die in the future? No, I don't see it. I can say that proxies, if they don't evolve, of course they will die. But we need to understand that it is still impossible to use the technologies of the 15th year in the 25th year. Relatively speaking, when we could quite calmly pull any web resources without the UD protocol on ordinary TCP. Well, we need to evolve. So I think proxies will never, ever die. And I can't even foresee anything of this kind happening. So don't worry about it. And the Date House is a great system, cool. I can't say anything good in the sense that they have some innovative developments, but nothing bad. A good option, which, relatively speaking, if I were an ordinary owner of a web resource, I would install such a system for myself. She's cool. Next. There is a lot of flooding here, it has started and so on. User AAA wrote, how are things with Yandex? Is any preset of the 3 versions suitable for working with it? With Yandex, to be honest, not many people work for me, so sorry, I can't say something good or bad about it either. I haven't seen any complaints, that's all. I actually, here I am not asking users to leave good reviews. For me, the absence of negative ones is the best thing. And if users don't write negative ones, then everything is fine. Only the negative ones are worth paying attention to, because if there are too many positive reviews, then you cannot withdraw them later. Let's say when there are a lot of customers, because now we are actually working at the limit of our capabilities. It is unrealistic to find more people. It's unrealistic because I was looking and my salaries are not a little higher than the market, but several times higher than the market. And get to me. This is actually sitting at home, spitting at the ceiling to yourself, no one touches you. You have been given a task, do it well. Just turn on your imagination, make it wonderful. No one is rushing you, no one is touching anything. But you should definitely, let's say, be of some interest in the sense that you should be someone. You can't just motivate some John. Therefore, I have already digressed from the topic. The next question is from a question from user John. When will the update be added to the Patreon version of Canvas and WebGL substitution? I'll tell you. I'm planning for the month of October this year. It's either October or November, not earlier. For now, this will remain exclusive to personal versions, and I'll explain to you why. The thing is, if you noticed by the time lapse, I made changes. I introduced the substitution of Canvas and WebGL exactly when the substitution was introduced in Google. That is, when Google changed the algorithms for processing Canvas. It was a matter of principle. I don't want now, let's just say, there are a lot more personal users than there are Patreon users. Patreon users, I love them all, of course, I don't want to offend them in any way, but the predominant group are personal users. and therefore the main attention is focused on them. So, alas, it's not worth waiting until October. The next question is from the Smile user. How to use mobile proxies in Russia. Without a VPN, they do not work for many, and this worsens the registration process. Maybe there is some convenient application for filtering packets. Smile. Of course there is. Of course there is. And who is interested in this question? I will now give you this solution. I must say right away that I am not responsible for its relevance at the moment, but just a couple of weeks ago. And for many months before that it worked absolutely perfectly. This solution is called anti-DP and moment. The main thing is that I reset it correctly for you, because I just went to GitHub, and here I saw a complete trash. I won't drop it to you along the way. Heck, either the owner deleted his solution. I don't see the author of just this solution. So, but we have a problem, yes. I can't tell you, there are some devils that are also called, but their solution is not that, absolutely not that. Here, in general, the Turk has some kind of virus on GitHub. God, what fuckers. Where do they come from? One moment. Wait, please, I'm asking you to wait, because the person asked a really interesting question. Vladik, okay. Then we have the following situation, that the user developed this solution, he deleted his repository on GitHub, or he was deleted. Unfortunately, I can't help in this case, I've only seen one solution. If it's interesting, maybe someone has it left. The user is like this. Damn it, why the fuck do I have a link being entered? The moment? Fuck you. In short, I have a link being entered for something. Fucking this one. Whoa, wait. In short, the fuck knows what kind of link I dropped. I ask you to treat this called. I ask you to pay attention to this. I didn't drop a link to some virus, but I'm not responsible for a specific repository. The repository was called Goodbye Deep from the Vladik's user. Unfortunately, I don't know any other options. The next question, a question from a worker matrix user. What are the main things to follow when working with matrix? The thing is very simple. We take and go to such a web resource, now I will give it. Right now. If anything, it's not a fart, but a keyboard creaks on a leather table. Look, worker metrics. You have a link like USA. Philips.com. Why do you need this link? If you click on this link, add some product to the basket, and you can go to pay with a stick, then you have everything fucked up. And you bypassed TERT metrics. If not, then, accordingly, here is the simplest detector for you, how the system detects you. Whether she discovers you or not. In general, they have the most basic built on working with an IP address from latency. So using dead proxies does not work in any way, and using the beautiful and magnificent proxy site detect.expert, the best on the market, is the solution to your problem. He told me. So let's move on. Question from user Yami. Dmitry, what is the better product of a georouter, in which it is also possible to implement this? Yami, in no way do I want to say anything bad about the great product from the user of Knop. These are completely different things. The fact is that the user has a virtual Knop router, that is, you can deploy it on your physical computer inside it. The product from Geobox is deployed on a separate device on a Raspberry, that is, on a Raspberry Pi. These are different products. How can you compare, for example, a luxury Jeep with a sports car? It seems to be yes, that is, and it goes, but it goes absolutely differently, and for each there is its own application. And a luxury Jeep will never replace a sports car, and a sports car will never replace a luxury Jeep. Here's an example. Next question. A question from the user00. Dima, hi. Hello, user00. With regard to the product vector T13 Geobox. For those people who have the lifetime Geobox software, in this case, will your solution be free? Or will it have to be paid as a separate solution? If you have a Geobox solution, then it's not that it has nothing to do with me, we work together. But you can't get a personal account. And if you have both a Geobox and a Personalka, then I think there are no problems, and you can write to the Geobox support. I'll explain. We have all transactions, completely. All support will go through Geobox supports, not through my supports. Accordingly, you can write to the Geobox support with this question, and I am sure that they will help you. At the moment, I don't see any problems with this, but it's not worth referring to me, because this is the first case. We have just started working with Geobox, and I don't want to get into a mess here when I promised you something is not what it should be. Here. So I think if you have Geobox staff, then there will be no problems. But it is better to check with the Geobox support. Next question. Question from user John. What decisions on your account would be better to make about traffic analysis so that VPN SSS do not fall down? What decisions on your account would be better to make about? Okay, I get the question. John, VPN can be determined in 100% of cases. 100%. If we are talking about WireGuard, for example, WireGuard can be hidden. It can be hidden quite simply, but since it is so lightweight, a very, very light protocol, it has limited possibilities. If we are talking about a full autopsy, then of course OpenVPN is a higher priority. But do not forget that behind the full autopsy lies a complete reworking into critical OpenVPN protocols. And it's complicated. Therefore, if you want to hide in terms of proxification, I think that Vagrd will still be easier for you, but either use the Red Sox. This is pornography in general. I think it would be better to work with the change in the AirGuard. And even the same GPT chat can help you. And not to mention the fact that you can change the client application as you want. For example, when I tested it, I changed it, for example. You can do it yourself. You know that AirGuard is very dependent on configs. You can register anything you want in the configs. For example, I prescribed there any M2 that I wanted. I wanted 9000 M2 for myself, not knowing what the fuck, just for a test I did it. Well, here's an option like this. And you can do it on any requests. OpenVPN is a little more complicated in this regard, but it is also feasible. But OpenVPN will always have to either work on Linux, or rewrite the drivers, and, accordingly, sign with Microsoft. In general, there are your hemorrhoids everywhere, and I'll tell you so, if you don't have advanced programming skills. It will be quite difficult to do this in terms of OpenVPN, but in terms of AirGuard, there are no problems. G5 chat will help you, it will help you. To be honest, I'm not sending now just to send, but in fact I'm saying. Koch is 2013. Greetings, Koch, and when will we get an update from the substitution of Canvas and Vez? I'm talking about a user of personal versions. How are the situations with Microsoft signatures? Microsoft signatures have been received, as a matter of fact. That's why we made this update. That's when. Starting from Friday, we will start issuing already. But I repeat right away, there is no need to get attached. What will you get right away within one day? No, alas, even this time we are not even introducing a paid queue. I'll explain why. There are a lot of applications. We haven't gotten even with all the applications from the previous updates yet. That is, now there are users. We have clearly calculated how many personal users there are now. 3,817. I will need to issue 3,817 assemblies starting from this Friday. This is a huge amount. A huge number of me again have to hire additional programmers in order to help me, the same team in fact. Here, but it won't work quickly. I think that you have just conditionally the first turn, so I think within the next 2 weeks anyway, not before. And even for money, you can't speed up somehow in any way. So, the next question. Question from the user Alexei Antifrodovich. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Alexei Antifrodovich. I have in your checker on 3 different PCs the same MD Imprint 5 in Method 1 source canvas. Why can it be? This can happen if you use the same browser and you have plus or minus the same video card. That's it. And about this checker, look, I would like to tell everyone. This checker is elementary. What an elementary kickass. Any programmer can write it. Fuck, I'm not even a programmer, don't. Anyone who knows the markup language, TML, DAM, and JavaScript, at least at the initial level, at the level of June. He can write this checker. I just wanted to show it with this. Explain what I wanted to show. I didn't say that this is a straight super anti-fraud system that no one can pass. I'm fucked up when they can't pass it. And now I honestly admit to you, I launched this fucking dolphin. This dolphin, bitch, showed me a dick and didn't want to go through anything. I was in shock. So for this dolphin, how many there are I think? Thousands of people are subscribed, thousands of people pay money every day. Well, every month for this browser, and it generally, in fact, it doesn't fucking work. It's a fucking fiction. Well, there's a memchick with a woman there. You know they're filming her, she's standing somewhere on the ship or something, such an old woman. Here, here, here and here. Well, in fact, I had these same words when I saw this shit. Why am I doing this? The checker service is incredibly simple. The source code is open, and you can check and calibrate your systems on it. Again, do what you want with it. Someone will improve it, it will only be good. I wanted to show an example that even with minimal knowledge, it is possible to bypass the current anti-detects, most of them. Not to mention that if we dig a little deeper and apply some extraterrestrial alien technologies. Well, you understand at what level the anti-detects are now, at the level of such a pissed-off one down here somewhere. And, strictly speaking, the anti-fraud system, in which huge sums of money are invested. You see, to find some powerful dude who is well versed in JavaScript. He would have smashed this script, because I am not a JavaScript writer, and would have done something magnificent, beautiful. Something that would detect all the antiques in general. So that's how it is. The next question from the user is about the partnership with Geobox, that is. Now it will be possible to implement work with GMplay on the Geobox VM. I have a personal version with Heckamplay. I have never received a working version yet. We worked with you, we met with you, we tried to do everything for you, but, as you remember, we stopped at the fact that we could not get into the who. Yes, right. And how can I give you working software if you couldn't even do that? We are with you more precisely. I will not shift it here specifically to you. But there is a good point. Because of the partnership with Geobox, we don't need to actually bother with a signature now. In other words, we are eliminating this moment because it was necessary in the first place just for my substitution method. So yes. Yes, my answer is yes. Next question. A question from the user. Who's there? Again, the user is 00. I answered your question earlier. I answered your question a little earlier. Next question, a question from user AAA. Do I need to install video drivers if there is a video chip in the motherboard, and there is also a video card? For some reason, I don't have an NVIDIA control panel on virtual machines like this. But you only need a video driver for the main video card and for the one on the motherboard. It is recommended to disable it in the BIOS altogether. Then you won't have any problems at all. You can easily disable it elementary in the BIOS. The best option. And if you install the driver, do not install it yourself, install Windows. Well, that's it. Question from user Dennis. Sorry, can you briefly explain why the nonsense about the Android emulator? Nonsense, because the finger is using a processor instruction that doesn't match. I haven't seen any emulator that emulates CPU instructions for ARM processors. This is the first one. The second is the absence of a SIM card. The third is the absence of a signal from the base station, the absence of a topic identifier, the absence of an identifier of the radio communication module, and so on. This list can go on, go on, go on, go on. All the emulators that exist, they are created to emulate the operation of software in order to see how it will work, how it will run, but in no way to bypass anti-fraud systems. The next question is a question from user David. The news is just a bomb. Friendship with Geobox. I am very happy and congratulate all of us. David, I congratulate you too. It's very interesting. What do you think about why Google decided to move to fully hardware acceleration? Is this by any chance related to using the user's resources? David, the question is unclear. You know, honestly, the more I try to get into this whole bullshit, the more I want to put, relatively speaking, a foil cap on my head. But I clearly know by myself that, for example, here is an Apple device. Yes, I don't care. I have one of the phones that I use in everyday life, which has nothing on it. I'm not a criminal, I'm not some super encrypted dude or cypherpunk. I have several phones, but my main one is still the Apple phone. But I will still refuse the Apple phone 100% this year, because I will not, let's say, share my experiences and thoughts yet. But it feels like this is not my device. In the sense that you are buying a device, but it feels like you are renting it. That is, it's not yours, you can't do shit there. But again, you can treat it differently. But this moment with the microphone on, of course, it pisses me off a little bit. Yes, I understand that I have nothing to hide. In fact, I am an absolutely law-abiding citizen. But I want a little more confidence. That when you are playing at the zoo, no one is listening to you at this moment. Relatively speaking, let's say so. Here. So what does Google do? Google does what it doesn't fucking benefit from. That's it. What is their long-term plan? Google is not doing something that will have an effect in a week or a month. They can do something that will have an effect in a few years or in 10 years, relatively speaking. Why was this done? Why did you abandon software acceleration, which was actually used by a third of users? Fuck knows. And I don't have an adequate explanation. Well, maybe, but yes, you need to understand that 60% of the internet is actually bot traffic right now. Maybe they want to fight it. That is, you think that you are the main threat, those who, as I said, sizzle dildex from Amazon. No. 60% of the internet is bot traffic. Maybe they want to put an end to bot traffic, fuck knows. So, a white screen instead of a slide, the sound is gone, don't worry, it's been a long time, and it's not true. So, the next question, and the question is user Alexei Antifraudovich. Tell me please, will there be a substitution of Kana and WebJ in the Patreon version of the Anti-Detect? It will be Alexei Antifraudovich. As I said, October-November of this year will be a substitution. The only thing is that the number of video cards, respectively, will be limited in comparison with the personal version. Because, again, if we take what year? 2018 or 19th, when Patreon appeared, then there were more Patreon users than there were Personalock users. At the moment, there are several times more personal users than Patreon users. Therefore, after all, personal users, they are the fundamental audience. And Patreon is more like created as an introductory version. Quite a few people still stay on Patreon, because I don't have statistics right now. But most of the people who come to us for personal training, they come just from the Patreon version. Well, because they tried it there, everything works for them, they are satisfied with everything, they want to expand. They want to improve, and, as a matter of fact, this is how it happens. Next question. Question from user AAA. Is it possible to use a real network card when working? Does multiple US-connected network cards affect network fingerprints? Is it important to change MAC addresses? Is it important to use a Bridget adapter? Let's start from the end. The Bridget adapter is not important, the MAC address is not important, it cannot be obtained in any way. This is a completely different level of the access model. Previously, it could be obtained only with the help of Java. Not to be confused with JavaScript, Java is a virtual machine. We once had this Java long time ago, when we were still using Flash and so on. At the moment, there is no way to get the user's MAC address remotely, because this is the physical level of the access model. Does multiple US-connected network cards affect network fingerprints in any way? Is it possible to use a real network card when working? Need to. Not just possible, but necessary. Not just important, more precisely necessary. So, the next question. David says that a neural network cannot defeat those who have a head on their shoulders. This is a fact. This is a fact, David, I agree. A question from the user. Are there any other flags that affect the audio fingerprint? I urge you not to think about the audio imprint at all. Because the sampling rate, yes, affects, but again, look, how would you say so? You can take and make an audio print unique. Do you know how? Here again, I got my throat wet. Here we are today looking at a page with an audio print. There we saw, for example, the number of columns, the number of withdrawal funds. But on this page, it did not participate as a variable in the audio print. What prevents it from being added there? Nothing hinders. Right. What prevents you from adding, for example, by trait there? Nothing hinders. In other words, what I want to tell you. You can fuck yourself up and add as much as possible to this audio print in order to expand its entropy in such a way that there are, for example, not 16 of these prints, but, for example, 64, relatively speaking, of these prints. Meaning? Nothing. Therefore, I will say that there is nothing important in this fingerprint, and there is no need to bother with it, of course, if you do not work on the server. If you are working on a server, it's better to slow down a little bit, because at least on the server, We have such a thing that when we turn on the server on Windows, we don't have the audio service running at all. We need to accept this, too, because even banally launching this audio service, we can have results already in passing, for example. The same registrations in Google slightly improve. So let's move on. The next question is the user's questions. Can it help working with Firefox with all the fingerprint generation flags turned off? I think not, because this is already an unusual action. That is, I think not. To be honest, I feel Firefox very, very rarely. After they added this substitution of prints, the project became absolutely strange for me. Strange in the sense that they're fingerprints. Okay, take the canvas of them. Here you know that they can turn on canvas substitution. Okay, change the scale by 1%. If you don't know how to change by 1%, change by 10% by simply turning the mouse wheel. You will already see a completely different canvas. What's the point? Fuck knows. Creates complete chaos of some kind. So I can't say that it will be better. Next question. A question from the user Future OK. Vector, hi. Hello, Futures OK. To be honest, recently my hands have been dropping. There has been a desire to move into the white sphere of earnings altogether. Because of the gray with gray associated with anti-detects. All this traffic with neural networks is pushing melancholy. And I realize that now the fight against anti-fraud systems will be almost impossible. Maybe I'm wrong, I don't know, but I would like to know your opinion. What awaits us? Maybe it's time to go to the factory now. Bye, I told myself. Working now with Google and Yandex. Futures. I will say this, there is no doubt. Doubt breeds chaos, and chaos undoubtedly leads you to ruin. That's what they said in a funny movie called Gentlemen. The movie is cool, but the dialogues are complete. Well, let's not talk about it. Why am I saying all this? There is no need to doubt at all. How can you? Remember the first Matrix, relatively speaking. How can you jump a creature onto a building if you're in doubt? Nothing. You won't jump over. That's exactly the same here. What doubts do you have? The fact that something is not working out for you is not a reason to doubt, it is a reason to find reasons or change. But it is in this regard. The plant, well, I do not know, is a successful factory worker. Well, sorry, relatively speaking. The antidote is always in our head. I don't want that many. I'll tell you this. Come on, okay? We have 264 people here, not so many. Learn how to register Microsoft partner accounts, and you will sell them for $250-300 apiece. Zero risk, zero of everything in general, and almost zero on consumables. Something they won't tell you anywhere else. And in the market, it is in fucking demand. Even I will buy from you. Because sometimes working with Microsoft, it is connected with communication with support, for which you simply do not have time. And when you have a massive find. After all, even when you know that the whole system is from top to bottom. You understand that sometimes it's easier to pay someone to do it for you. Therefore, it is definitely not necessary to go to the factory. And on Yandex. On what? And you need to score on Yandex for sure. I don't see any money there at all. The next question is from David. I stuck to it several times so as not to write an article about web transport. I emphasize web transport because it already works in test mode on new Macs. But still about the new chips. Maco's rules. Although ideally, if everything works perfectly on your antique Windows, there will be many times more passage than on Maco's. David, and if you have information, I urge you with pleasure, if you have a desire, to share it in the Patreon chat or in public chats. Why not? Because in any case, we are all in the same team. Yes, we are all doing the same thing with you, and I am exactly the same as you. In other words, I may have a little more experience than a person who started there 2 or 3 years ago, for example. I may have a little more practice and so on, because, well, anyway, 10 years in this particular field, but it's quite a lot, I think. That's why, for my part, of course, I am happy to share information. I am happy to conduct webinars, especially when there is such an opportunity. And I urge you in the same way. I'm sorry. I urge you to share information in the same way. So, David, if you write an article, it will be great. Grandfather March writes that the sphere is still. I understand that with respect to the browser. I do not know if the sphere has passed or not. By the way, you can write. Sorry, I missed this moment. Why don't I have a public chat displayed? TKK user? The fact is that we have a chat on moderation, because some bad personalities like to write all kinds of advertising, especially about the sale of all kinds of prohibited cards and so on and carding. And firm what I suffer very much, to be honest. Because on average I have about 200 or 300 bans in a Russian language chat every day. Because spam is an attack. Spam is an attack on webinars in the same way spam is an attack. So Sorian. Good time of day. Hector. Good day to you too. Thank you for the invaluable information. Glad to share, Hector. How to evaluate detect ads browser. I didn't appreciate it in any way. I think it would be better for users to evaluate it, for example, this simplest elementary primitive checker that I gave. And sorry, I don't manage. I repeat, I literally just recently after the last webinar, 2 weeks ago, I went in for the first time. And discovered the anti-deck browser. That's when there was a dolphin. I went on it and that's it. I saw it, closed it, deleted it. Washed myself with holy water and that's it. This is where my acquaintances ended. So, the next fleet. User's question. How to intercept a fingerprint creation request if a separate script is not searched for in the source through the search. There are no mentions. You can intercept these requests using external means, because when there is, for example, a request for the same canvas or web, you always have a request to your DirectX, and there are plenty of request interceptors in DirectX on GitHub. To do this is not a problem. So, the next question. Question from user Hector. The question is from users, and I apologize for the stupid question. How do we get this observable litmus test? Hector, sorry, I didn't really understand you here in this matter. But I repeat, we have now reached only the questions that were asked at the time stamp 1830. Wow, cool. Next question. A question from the user. Why can't I programmatically change the color by one tone, for example? And you can change the color by one tone, for example. But there is such a thing called in the hashing phase, which allows you to roll back this change by plus or minus. And in this way, the real fingerprint will still be known. Alas, and a fact. The fingerprint is formed in the form of code B64. Based on code B64, we can recreate the rendered image, which happens on a web resource, for example, any, absolutely. And if we want to do something with each pixel on this web resource, or with a certain one individually, we can roll back by plus or minus 1 ton, and this procedure is called in the hashing phase. I repeat again. so it's not really suitable for us. So, the British came to us. Well, they came more precisely, they have already left. Next question. A question from the user Spady. All horror stories concern the latest versions of browsers. And why can't I roll back in versions and continue working? Because anti-fraud systems have a certain flag for absolutely everyone. You can register even in the same free Xiaomi. It is called an outdated browser. An outdated browser is, say, a flag for an anti-fraud system if the browser used by the user is older than 5 versions from the current one. Next question. Question from user A. And if you turn off the audio fingerprint, is it possible to secure the server? No, you can't. I mentioned it a little earlier. It won't work that way. The next question is from user David. Question. In what way from the technical side? According to which libraries, scripts on the browser? Google listens to what you say next, and so on, displays it as ads on YouTube. In no way. Of course, you can't use it. You need to understand that if we all went to school, then we have speakers. The speakers are the same microphone. If you don't want to believe it, you can plug your speaker into the microphone jack, use it as a microphone. This is so for those who want to wear a foil hat, the same one that I wear. Here. Well, as for the fact that it's hellish on YouTube, they really make even me think a little bit. Here I can't answer you, because I don't have a clear answer, and definitely not based on the voice. I will explain at least one reason. And the fact is that there is no microphone or speakers on my computer. And now I'm talking at all through the phone. So anyway, somehow neural networks know that if you've ever jerked off to a zoo, then you'd better show zoo food. They understand that you will want to bait someday. Well, that's as an option. The next question is again from David. Dima Jan, I thought you had your own sewer. No. But no, I don't have anything like that. I don't use any methods of circumvention of censorship or anything else. I fully adhere to the legal measures that have been taken in the state of which I am currently a citizen. Let's move on. When will the proxy servers appear? There is no demand for them, I can't say. The next question, a big question from the user Barmely. Barmely says that I bypassed GeoGuard without any problems when working with American sides. But the last one place, the number of conclusions is off the scale. And hence about the first one. There is a theory that Loken is able to expand edits and analyze in more detail. How thoroughly is this opinion that, in addition to bypassing, there are some other network patterns that the office has cheated? But it does not swear at this, but as a result it does not output. I'll tell you. You can reverse the Barmely. I saw him off. I have conducted since I conducted it. They, in my opinion, have not been updated. So far, to date, I haven't checked for the last week, but there have been no updates. None from the Geo Year offer side. To check network traffic of Geo type, DP type more precisely, I did not find. They are simply not there. But GeoGuard collects more than 230 parameters. Why more than 230? Because a couple are not yet differentiated. And they haven't been diffused for probably a year. So in fact, it's not really interesting to me right now even. With regard to what they collect complete information about all network devices, including connections. Including, do not forget, that it collects information about devices on your network. And if there are no other devices on this network, it's suspicious for him. But this, at least, I could find out based on my checks. Because we only see the front end, and I do not know how they process the logic. So that's it. But there is nothing else there. The second question is about payment details. How important is it to have a unique BIN, or is it still a high-quality primary bypass? High-quality bypass is 100% more important because it is a unique BIN. But we still have a large number of banks in the world, but no one is immune from the fact that someone wants to withdraw money through the same bank as you. Right. Therefore, I do not advise you to bother with creating your own BIN 100%. I'll explain why. Because I also have, you can see in my profile, I have a certain web resource on which we made cards. And in the same way we created our own BINs. We had, well, not us, because we were, relatively speaking, intermediaries and created from a higher resource. So, well, creating your own BIN costs only €1,000, $1,000 or €1,000. This is an official payment, for example, to the Visa card company that we created. And it doesn't solve anything at all. I'll explain why. Because in your own BIN, the information about your bank will always be the same. This is the first one. Secondly, if there is no one on this, in fact, on the same BIN as you have legitimate ones, then, accordingly, they will look at you again. So no, no, and no again. It's a stupid idea only to spend extra money. The third question. Wi-Fi emulation, how much should it match the IP? Does the accuracy to the city make sense, or is it unnecessary? It must match the IP 100%. And again, if we are talking about the accuracy of the geoposition 20 meters, but I, at least, found out for myself. 20 meters is the geocompliant limit at the moment. That is, I mean the accuracy of the definition of 20 meters. How to check it? You can check with the help of the Wi-Fi spike software available on the detect.expert website, which collects information about the Wi-Fi networks around you and uses the same API as the geocomplay to determine your geolocation. Question 4. What kind of equipment do you use to test your mobile proxies on the expert detector? Especially interesting for 4G 5G. It's no secret Go IP gateways. I hope I have answered all your questions. So let's move on. Next question, next question, next question. A question from a Worker Delhi user. Do the problems of web transport relate to proxying through routers? In total, yes. I would say yes, it does. Let's move on. Next question. Question. People have been repeating questions here a lot, so sorry I am now. A question from the user Alexk. Good afternoon, Dmitry. Good afternoon, Alex G. Tell me if there is a virtual machine inside with your 5th version anti-detect to use a connection to a resident IP. Using Soft Eater VPN, using the 443rd port. Then, there will be no leaks, and there will be a perfect connection. Chat G5 claims that through this type of connection, there will be native support for quick web transport. You need to understand that GPT chat is devoid of logic. This is the first one. The second is nonsense, the account of what? He tells you, unfortunately. The fact is that when using Soft Eater VPN, you will have, firstly, detect Soft Eater VPN, secondly, you will have no quick. And, thirdly, there is no web transport on Soft. And generally on all public and VPN services at all in principle, as far as I know. If anyone knows other information, correct me. Therefore, no, you are here specifically for fucking. So, the next question. User's question but nar. Hello, Vector. Hello, nar. Do I need to change the gerund for the device and link? Absolutely not. Good afternoon, Dmitry, writes Alex G. Good afternoon, Alex G, writes Dmitry. Next question. A question from the user Vector Handsome. Wow, Epta. Dmitry, hello. Hello, Vector Handsome. I answer myself. Thank you for the webinar, I'm glad you enjoyed it. But I have a question about web transport. As far as I understand, web transport uses ATP protocol 3, which uses QUIC, and QUIC uses UD protocols. So, you said that through detect, through web transport, the VPN proxy will bypass. And regardless of whether the UD protocol is supported in this case. Sleepy, well, not really, I said so. I said that it will bypass the detect anyway, it will still allow you to determine the user's IP address. Even in addition to the fact that you have and QUIC. Directly OpenVPN with protocol support, for example, we have UD page 3, and web transport goes by type 3. They just differ a little judging from this information. Could you clarify a little more about web transport? Look, Vector is handsome. I tried it all on myself. I got the opportunity to get the user's IP address by passing QUIC and UD. Again, thanks to the same web transport. You can recreate it all if you, for example, again use the same G's chat that I just criticized. It will allow you to create it only with a custom project, but not with the official one, I repeat, but with a GitHub. Torment him or find him yourself on GitHub, or if you want, I can give you a link. After that, you will be told that it will be impossible to directly get an IP address using a web transport. However, there is such a possibility, again, if you are swayed by the same thing, but by YAS. In addition, you will have an additional opportunity to determine the proxy using the so-called ping-pong procedure, when you can perform requests and responses and check their response time. Wow! Questions. There are no fewer questions. So, friends, we have been having a webinar for 2.5 hours instead of an hour and a half, as I wanted. Let's answer a few more questions quickly now, and, probably, we will finish for today. NAR user questions: do I need to replace the web with an HR canvas? As far as I know, a NAR user, here is the display of information on your monitor, but not the display of information inside your canvas. If I'm wrong, correct me. In this case, I simply have not heard and am not aware of it. So, the following questions. Questions user Grandfather March. Victor, hello. Hello, Grandfather March. Please tell us what has changed in Netflix. Now you can register a personal account with a combination of your proxies. But it is not possible to enter. We get a bank where to dig. Ditmar, a very simple moment, where to dig you, detective, thanks to the use of OpenVPN. Kleis is incredibly sensitive to this. Therefore, change the proxification method, for example, to a router from Kvanon, or to products from Geoboxes. You will not have any problems with this. So I advise you to pay attention to this. Next question. A question from a user on PayPal is also already using a web PU receipt. Damn it! You've baffled me now, to be honest, a NAR user. I can't tell you now, I won't lead you into fornication, but as far as I remember, not yet. It's easy to check. Look at the source code in the navigator. Web Jeep. Next question. Question from the Combinator user. Hi, Victor. Hello, Combinator. I watched your video about using logs to work on various sites. You said it was very risky. Tell me, how exactly do they find people who work through logs? Combinator, here the topic is about, let's say it's huge. I can't reveal it to you right now. If it's interesting, but we'll reveal it at the next webinar. Ask the question first, because now it's for the next 20 to 30 minutes of the lecture. In total, I can say that the use of logs, that is, imagine that you take your typewriter and give it to someone. How did your typewriter, desktop computer, being, relatively speaking, in France yesterday, conditionally? Today moved, for example, to Singapore. I take it that's what you were talking about. You know, it's not quite possible. And as for how these people are found, we need more context. Sorry, probably, either I'm exhausted today, I don't quite understand anymore, but I probably don't quite understand. Sorry. So guys, we already have 8:31, at least on my watch. 2.5 hours of our today's webinar passed. There are 149 unanswered questions. Guys, I'm sorry, but honestly, that's probably all for today. Thank you so much for your activity. I strongly advise you to leave messages first in the chat next time, then, of course, I will respond to your messages. In the end, well, very much. You understand, it's like we're holding a consultation with you. It can be a very long time. Thank you very much for your presence at the webinar today. I will be waiting for you at the next webinar. All the best to you. Leave your feedback on what topics you would like to hold the next webinar, or my wife a free topic, as always I do. In the meantime, some music. Have a wonderful Thursday evening, everyone. All the best.